Villains can make or break a movie. Hell, they can even make or break a franchise depending on how they're utilized. Villains often act as a foil to our main characters. They allow us to see our protagonists in a different light, push them past their breaking points, or force them to adapt and change in order to protect a loved one, save a city, or prevent some future horrific act. They're very versatile in their narrative deployment as well, allowing for an extremely wide range of characters to be considered good villains. You can take an extremely effective and beloved villain, flip their entire personality, radically change their motivations and goals, and still come out with an extremely effective and beloved villain on the other side. The rubric is quite flexible. For all the problems and oddities circulating around the MCU these days, the one area in which they're succeeding far more often than not is, funnily enough, an area in which they used to have a massive problem. Villains, baby, and Phase 4 has delivered us some great ones. Right from the jump, we got Black Widow with Taskmaster and Dreykov as our main villains. And yeah, they're not great, but after that we got Wenwu from Shang-Chi, and thankfully he is quite good. Really good, actually. In fact, I even had to rewatch this movie to convince myself he really is as good as I remember, and it turns out he's actually better. Not only is he given considerable backstory, necessary due to his extremely advanced age, but his ultimate goal is one that's pretty hard not to sympathize with. He wants to resurrect his wife, something he believes is possible because of an evil force whispering in his ear. And yeah, it's easy to side with our main characters here and believe that that's bogus, especially once we watch our main characters figure out what's actually calling out his name. But think of it from his side for a second. He's been alive for 1,000 years while wielding mystical and barely understood magical rings that grant him impossible powers. With the shit he's done and seen, is his wife still being alive and trying to get his attention really all that implausible? He wants nothing more in the world than for her back. He has an incredible ego and likely fancies himself capable of practically anything. He's been quite unbalanced since her death, and he hears her voice calling out to him. I think his line of thought is pretty easy to get on board with. Their relationship also gets some good backstory, and considering they meet and fall in love in a unique and interesting way, it's easy for us to become attached to them and their relationship. It's a good trope that's not overly indulgent. Pretty dark, all-powerful guy settles down because of love and starts to leave his former life behind. Only, that's not entirely possible, and she eventually dies due to acts Wenwu had committed in the past. Someone seeks revenge on him by killing her. The connection he has with our main character is obviously organic and adds an additional layer to their conflict, the stakes of which are devastatingly massive, yet between them we have interactions that feel more personal and grounded. It's mostly son trying to overcome father, and a third layer is even added when Shang-Chi is given the ability to wield his 10 rings against him. And the movie didn't really explore the absolute vitriol and hatred Wenwu must have felt when his trusty rings abandoned him for the person trying to prevent him from his greatest wish, but it's clearly there and acts as another element to one of the better conflicts from this phase. Then we get Eternals, and although I don't think the situation here is nearly as bad as it is in Black Widow, it's still not great. But I promise, this is the very last time you'll hear me say that. 5 more movies round out Phase 4, and all of their villains are excellent in their own right. Their utilization, however, isn't always quite as good. Spider-Man No Way Home is next, and their villains simultaneously require the least explanation as to why they're so successful, and also could be spoken about the most. A harmonious blend, where the enjoyability factor punches you right in the face without the need to overthink it, but if you do overthink it, you'll only be rewarded with a farther understanding of why it works so well. We'll only stick on this movie for a moment before moving on, but basically this type of movie had never been done before. Ever. We've had the MCU and other similar franchises tie in multiple characters from various movies before, but never across franchises like this. The blueprint just didn't exist, and the fact that this movie isn't a giant mess is an accomplishment all on its own. So much of this works off of pre-established relationships and connections. That's even the plot of the movie. Spider-Man is a beloved character, and an immensely lucrative one at that, and there's a giant fan base for all 3 of these iterations of Spider-Man. So you've got fans of the character, you've got fans of the MCU, and now you've got fans of those former 2 franchises who maybe aren't as high on the MCU itself, and you've even got the odd person who's just a fan of Toby or Andrew and wants to check in. The villains from these franchises are loved to varying levels, but they're all an extension of these 3 adored versions of Spider-Man, meaning when they're introduced or shown for the first time, they're gonna tickle that same nerve that's getting us all giddy about the idea of these franchises crossing over. And I think introducing them before the Spider-Man came together not only enhanced the moment when those 3 finally met, but allowed us more time with these villains to re-establish our connection to the ones we already knew, and form a new connection with the ones we might not be as familiar with. The movie also allows us considerable time with these villains in different atmospheres, such as the heat of battle with adrenaline running rampant, after being captured, confused, subdued, and tired, and then once they've reluctantly teamed up with Peter and see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. With simple things like glances, facial expressions, offhand remarks, and body language, we get to learn a lot about these characters and begin to sympathize with them, especially the ones given more prominence like Goblin and Doc Ock, because let's be honest, it's a 2.5-hour movie, and if you try to give us an interesting and complex Goblin, Doc Ock, Sandman, Shocker, and Lizard, you're just gonna give us a boring and shallow version of each. Goblin and Doc Ock were the best from this bunch, they probably made the right choice giving them the majority of the limelight. And in Goblin's case, he's just so goddamn fun. Cartoonishly so, and then he's also diabolical and commits a gruesome act towards the character who likely has the largest present audience, so then he becomes really easy to hate too. This movie managed to create one of my favorite Marvel scenes ever between a hero and a villain, and it's MCU's Spidey versus the Green Goblin from the Raimi universe. Usually impactful moments like that are only achievable when you've got significant time spent with them, or there's a lot of context and baggage from a personal connection. Kind of like with Ernie and Peter. But through so many adjacent relationships, this fight carries so much weight. Actually, it's really similar to Wanda and Thanos. The personal connection is quite minimal, but the larger connection, Thanos to the Avengers, Goblin to Spider-Man, plus a single dastardly act committed to our present main character allows for a very impactful confrontation. And Goblin sorta wins for a moment here. Like how the Joker would ultimately win if he ever got Batman to kill him, Goblin's goal here is just to sow chaos, and in pushing Peter towards genuinely trying to kill him, Goblin is winning. The villains in this movie inspire so many heart-wrenching and impactful moments, taking advantage of the movies that came before it even though they had no overarching grand plan. Some people's opinions of this movie have soured over time, mine included, because the plot at times is a little thin or messy here and there. But what they were able to achieve with this massive love letter, not only to Spider-Man, but to his entire universe, villains included, is nothing short of astounding. That one kind of got off the rails a little bit, if I'm being honest. But it's so hard to talk about facets of that movie without going into how insane its conception really was. Thankfully, the next one's a lot simpler, and I promise not to spend nearly as much time on it. Although Wanda Maximoff in the Multiverse of Madness is much more enjoyable to watch on screen than she is an incredible villain, she is still quite a good one. Her motivation is fine, but a bit confusing. Since last we left Wanda, she was in the process of healing away from tendencies like this. So it's a bit of a shock in a bad way that she's this cut and dry villain here. They do a pretty good job of rectifying that by telling us that, actually, she's being possessed by a far more evil version of herself, and this isn't really our Wanda doing all of this. But that kind of piles onto my main, well, not criticism, because I do love this Wanda, but maybe thought, and that was that they tried to make her a character in this movie at all. Okay, side note, I think I may have misinterpreted or misremembered this scene on my first watch. I used to think that this Wanda was our Wanda, and that an alternate Wanda had dreamwalked into our Wanda, and this was our Wanda being held hostage. Meaning the Wanda throughout this movie was never really the one we've had in the Avengers and WandaVision and all that. Now, although I can't see how that theory is straight up wrong, I do think it's more likely since rewatching this movie yet again that the Darkhold simply corrupted our Wanda into becoming this dark and evil person. I think. My point does still remain either way, however. But now back to me from the past. Or me from even farther in the past, since this is still me from the past. I love Wanda. For a few reasons, she is my #1 favorite MCU character, far and away. But in this movie, with her being so ungodly strong and cruel, I like the idea of stripping away the person of Wanda and allowing her to ascend to the form of a force of nature villain. Let our Wanda be a weird shell vessel for this monster, whether it be one exclusively corrupted by the Darkhold or an alternate version like the one I used to think she was, who we can explore the trauma and heartache of after, but leave her as this unconquerable, overpowered entity to struggle to oppose throughout the movie. That's a position she occupies for a considerable amount of time in this movie anyways, and it's when she's at her most fun. I guess then the question would be, how would they have managed to overcome her at the end? But I think there are always creative solutions to a problem like that. I just think giving this absolute unit of a villain the cliched change your mind, find her humanity ending where she stops being the villain is a bit lame, especially considering they did similar tactics to no avail throughout, and then she changes her mind rather hurriedly. Yes, they up the stakes by having her see the fear in her children's eyes, but there are other Billies and Tommies in other universes that haven't seen her like this, and I think this Wanda would seek them out before giving up altogether. But regardless, fuck is she ever fun to have on screen. Great villains are often a byproduct of great performances, and I think in general Wanda/Scarlet Witch has captured the hearts of so many because of how incredible Elizabeth Olsen is in this role. In a different universe, there's a more tame version of this script directed by not Sam Raimi, or one directed by him but toned down by the MCU at large, and I think it's quite a bit shittier. Giving her such visceral and cool kills and badass moments and lines makes this villain performance really stand out. Doctor Strange is a great counterpart for her, and America Chavez is a way better MacGuffin plot device than most. I really like this movie, but I do think both her and this film fall into the category of more enjoyable than it is technically good, even if it is still quite solid. God, that's so pretentious, I'm sorry. But that's okay, because you can have an insanely fun and enjoyable character who has a few more flaws than you like and still adore the performance and the movie. That is a far better alternative than what our next movie gave us, which was an incredibly cool and powerful villain played by quite possibly the best working actor today, buried in criminally minimal screen time amidst a movie that was way more concerned with making cringy jokes and keeping the tone lighter than a 4-panel Archie comic than it was with providing us with a compelling movie. I hate Thor: Love and Thunder so much, you guys. This one's an oddity for this list, because it's the only one where the villain's efficacy is drastically different from the movie itself. I've actually really struggled with whether or not Gorr exists as an addition to the good villain's notion, or if he falls under the exceptions list with Taskmaster and the like. and I think he's somehow both. Gorr himself, the God Butcher, played by Christian Bale, that guy is awesome. He's got a great backstory with compelling motivations and a neat way of acquiring his godly powers. He's strong and menacing, scene-stealing, and chilling. His dialogue is great, his plan is fine-ish, his surface-level goal is understandable and intriguing, and his ultimate goal is obviously justified. And that's really the one part of his character that's never actually shown to us. Because the rest of that is. It's just shallow and rushed as shit and being constantly saved at every turn by excellent source material and a world-class job by that guy whose name sounds like what John Mulaney did once he got older. Bailed Christianity.
Oh, brother, this guy...
He's got an A-plus backstory, with his family dying off on his desolate planet due to a severe lack of resources, while he and all of his people remain faithful to a god who may bring them prosperity. When he actually meets the god, he's a piece of garbage who laughs in his face for even thinking he might help him, and then, although the reason in the comics is sick, here it's just kind of sitting there waiting for him, Gorr takes hold of an immensely powerful sword and slays the god then and there, declaring that all gods must die. The timeline shown is messy, but it's reasonable to assume he goes on a very lengthy god-killing spree from then on, and that, combined with his godly sword, provide him with some unnaturally exceptional combat skills. But we never see him grow in strength, and we never see him become more rock-solid in his convictions of ridding the world of all gods. And we never see Gorr, the God Butcher, butchering any fucking gods. How hard would a montage be, Marvel? This movie's barely longer than the original cut of the first Pokemon movie. You had the time. Despite how tirelessly Taika shoves in jokes at every godforsaken turn, regardless of how fitting it is for the scene, Gorr doesn't really get the same treatment. Sure, characters act like Teletubbies while in his presence, but Gorr never really stoops to that level. He never sheds his intimidating and malevolent exterior. Probably because Bale would have quite literally left the set in full makeup and never returned had they made him go, "Zoinks, Lady Thor, that hammer's thicker than your boyfriend's skull, huh?" And then Lady Thor goes, "Wait until I make you eat it," or something stupid, and Star-Lord says, "Oh yeah, shit, they axed him from this movie because they had to keep the runtime under 11.5 minutes. At least he was in all the promos and got our hopes up, right? Remember when BDSP almost convinced us they'd use an expanded Platinum Pokedex? I love that! Stealing concepts from the best, I see. Every single time Gorr is on our screen, we are hooked, and for a brief moment in time, we forget we're sitting through an episode of The Fairly OddParents, and we get our hopes up that this movie might match Gorr's tone and get as dark and interesting as he is. For the record, I acknowledge that this movie isn't nearly as short as I'm making it out to be. But considering how much they try to shove into this thing, and how brutal the pacing feels because they never let a single scene or moment breathe, I really do look back at this thing and think an extra 30 to 45 minutes would have helped it out a lot under the right circumstances. But my final analysis in regards to this topic would be excellent villain, shit movie. It's not Gorr's fault that they forgot to record him while he was doing his most interesting and informative shit. It's not a mockumentary. He doesn't know where the camera is. Please don't give up on the nerdy shit because of this and go do a good Star Wars project still. Last but not least, Namor they never call him that here, but he does say Imperious Rex, and even though Marvel removed his bulge, they didn't remove his charisma. That is a good intro. No, I'm keeping it. I liked both him and this movie, neither of which I really expected. If you want my full thoughts on the movie, I just posted a review of it a little while ago. Go check it out. I think I articulate my thoughts well. But to summarize, it's good. I don't much like Black Panther 1, the tragic death of Chadwick after the script was already written, and Phase 4 being a bit janky at times really dampened my expectations for this thing, but it managed to win me over pretty darn quickly, and Namor was a big reason why. Another hit in this category for the Black Panther franchise, Wakanda Forever brings us a more grey villain than Marvel traditionally presents us with. A lot like Killmonger, but I'd say Namor is certainly easier to actually side with. Even if some of his goals are macabre and dark, he usually isn't. He shares some nice moments with our main characters, his adversaries, and we get to learn a good deal about his backstory and how he became who he is now. On a grand Marvel scale, the introduction of him and his homeland, renamed from Atlantis to Talokan for the MCU, is wonderful and will certainly be explored more down the line, in Black Panther 3 at the least, if not in a full-on Avengers movie here and there. With Shuri and Wakanda denying him his wishes, maybe he seeks out and assembles a version of the Council of Kings, bringing in Latveria's all-powerful ruler, Dr. Doom. We can only hope. Namor is cool as hell. His introduction is fantastic, his backstory is rich and easy to sympathize with, as are his ultimate goals of protecting his homeland from dangerous outsiders. He lands very cleanly in the villain category because of some of his desires and morals, but he's not mustache-twirling evil. He just falls a little farther on the opposite side of our heroes. Giving him moments of genuine connection with people like Shuri only allow us to further connect with him, and the fact that those moments are actually genuine and not some manipulative plot, combined with him yielding and honoring his yield later in the film, just makes him a character who's really easy to like, and although we don't necessarily want him to win, we don't want him to outright lose either. I love Namor, he's an excellent inclusion to this movie, and hopefully an even more excellent inclusion to the MCU. But okay, now for the duds. Phase 4 did have a few failures, notably Taskmaster from Black Widow and whoever the Eternals bad guy is. No, I know Icarus, but who's this guy? Crow? That doesn't even ring a bell. And I actually like this movie. For Taskmaster, they just fumbled the bag pretty badly. They X-Men Origins Wolverined him, where they took a sick-ass character with an incredibly neat power set and an actual personality and turned them into a cold and empty shell. They don't even use her powers well here at all, fumbling the bag even more with her fight against Red Guardian, where she uses Black Panther style instead of the Captain America one this movie had been setting up from the jump. The emotionless husk can actually be really cool, but as an introduction to a villain we have no real ties to, it's a bit of a hard sell, especially when you're taking a beloved comic book character who is so beloved because they are not a cold and empty shell. Why would they ever think we'd want this? Why did Origins ever think we'd want this? Who wrote this shit? I mean, oh, yeah, that makes sense. She is still alive upon the conclusion of this movie and somewhat freed from the constraints that made her so bland in Black Widow. So there is genuine hope she can return to something that resembles comic book form in the upcoming Thunderbolts movie, which she is confirmed to be in. The other villain here, her father, Dreykov, I think is more fine than bad. He's okay. I like the idea of the more personal and lower stakes than ultimate multiversal domination, but I just don't think they utilized him all that well, and his plot armor is almost distractingly silly. A fine addition to the movie who acts as a main driver of the plot, but we don't really grow to hate him or like him or see his side or anything that might resemble compelling. He's just kinda there and quite forgettable, much like the movie itself. A decent villain brought down even more by a really mediocre movie. And now for Eternals. What a wild ride this movie is. I am not surprised whatsoever that it has become so polarizing, and although I don't love it or consider it fantastic or anything, I do seem to like it more than most. But that's largely due to the setting and our actual Eternals, not the many antagonistic forces. How ill-defined they are is something I enjoy. Arishem isn't strictly bad, Icarus isn't strictly bad, and neither are the Deviants. Arishem is operating on a cosmic scale we can't really comprehend, and he is technically trying to create more life. He just doesn't mind sacrificing a heap of them in the process. It is a net gain, his end goal is certainly not evil. Where Icarus is concerned, he spent thousands of years being completely and utterly devoted to a cause, all while being propped up and praised every step of the way. For him to go against Arishem, it would be admitting he's been in the wrong for centuries. He's held on to the secret of the emergence for centuries as well. If he switched allegiances as the others found out, well then, why wouldn't he have just told them the truth right away? He's essentially trapped due to his prior choices, and it fits his character well that he'd fancy himself wise enough and strong enough to side with Arishem and oppose every single other Eternal. And only his connection with Cersei really saves him and all of humanity, and he realizes the error in his ways and completes the riff on his name by flying off into the sun. Icarus is pretty cool, and I like his utilization, even if the evil Superman trope has really worn out its welcome by this point. His plan is a bit vague and probably has some holes in it along the way, but I like him here and I think he's more of a competent villain than a great one or a bad one. Sprite joining him on a whim though, and then being forgiven afterwards also on a whim is pretty lame. The setup is vaguely there, but it's not developed or shown well at all, and she technically becomes an antagonist by siding against the Eternals and stabbing Cersei, so she brings the crop down quite a few pegs. But not as many pegs as the Deviants, the biggest offender in this regard. The wasted potential here is honestly rather immaculate. Gaining powers and in turn consciousness, the main deviant, Crow, voiced by the incredible Bill Skarsgård, begins to understand he and his race's role in this entire thing, recognizing he is little more than a pawn in the game of gods, no different than their enemy, the Eternals. Armed with this knowledge, he decides to hunt the Eternals to extinction, rather than do the much cooler and more interesting thing, which would be joining them in their battle against Arishem, something this movie practically teases us with. When Crow joins in the third act fight at the end, there's a moment where something cool might happen. Armed with their Unimind plan, they've now got a being with the power of two Celestials and his own power set nearby. They all oppose Icarus and Arishem. Crow has no love for the Eternals, rather hatred. But certainly his hatred must burn brighter for the creator of his hell, the one who sent these beings to destroy him and his entire kind without giving them the full story. Surely a compromise could be reached. But no. Athena just gets into a 1v1 and kills Crow as a bit of revenge for killing Gilgamesh, which I honestly didn't even realize they were going for here on my first watch since everything happened so fervently. The alternative to this, also, could have been Crow bringing an army of deviants to the final fight rather than just himself, making for a more complicated and chaotic final conflict. Perhaps he and his kind are simply unable to come to grips with the fact that the Eternals didn't know any better, or they're simply choosing to take their revenge out on Arishem by killing the Eternals. But even then, if he wants to take revenge on Arishem, why not just join them and help him put Tiamat to sleep instead, thus foiling his entire plan? Eternals is a beautiful, ambitious, frustrating, and rushed movie, and nowhere are those elements more exemplified than its many antagonistic forces. I don't think the villain situation here is nearly as bad as a lot of the movies from phases 1 through 3, but it could have been way, way better. And stacked against the incredibly high bar being set movie after movie by this phase 4 lineup, I do think Eternals clearly missed the mark. I still really want a sequel though. Do you agree with my thoughts? No, seriously, that's a genuine question. Do you? As strong as my convictions are in regards to this topic, I couldn't help but feel like I may have been overrating certain elements. Every time I analyze an individual one, I agree with my former thoughts and conclude that, yeah, that villainous aspect is handled excellently. But with Phase 4's weirdly low quality across the board, I sometimes struggle to come to grips with the fact that they've managed to pull off so many great antagonists despite that. I'm very interested to know your thoughts, so please let me know in the comments. Are the villains in Phase 4 the best in the entire MCU? Are the villains in this phase handled well, but are simply just the best element of a bad phase rather than a genuinely excellent aspect? Or are they just not all that good in general? I truly do think they're a gem amidst a sea of stones of varying quality, but I want to know what you think, so please do let me know. Don't forget to like if you enjoy this, and subscribe so I can keep making stuff like this, as I quite like doing it. Thanks for watching, until next time.